The golden doors of Le Chateau restaurant swung open with a gentle whoosh, revealing the most exclusive dining establishment in downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, while soft piano music drifted through the air like whispered secrets. This wasn't just any restaurant. It was where billionaires came to see and be seen, where million-dollar deals were made over champagne and caviar. Marcus Al-Rashid stepped inside, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor. At 52, he commanded attention wherever he went. His perfectly tailored navy suit probably cost more than most people's cars, and the diamond-encrusted watch on his wrist gleamed like a small constellation. Marcus had built his fortune in oil and technology, amassing billions that placed him among the world's wealthiest individuals. But wealth hadn't made him kind, it had made him arrogant. Behind him trailed his usual entourage, business associates, lawyers, and hangers-on who laughed at his jokes whether they were funny or not. They all shared one thing in common: they were afraid of Marcus. His temper was legendary, his cruelty toward those he considered beneath him was well documented, and his ability to destroy careers with a single phone call was absolute. The restaurant's atmosphere buzzed with quiet conversation and the gentle clink of expensive silverware. Marcus surveyed the room like a king examining his kingdom. He recognized several faces, other billionaires, politicians, celebrities, all people who mattered in his world. This was his element, surrounded by wealth and power. "Mr. Al-Rashid, welcome back." The maitre d' approached with a practiced smile. "Your usual table is ready." Marcus nodded curtly, not bothering to acknowledge the man's greeting. To him, service workers were invisible, existing only to fulfill his needs. He followed the maitre d' through the restaurant, past tables where Chicago's elite dined on, dishes that cost more than minimum wage, workers earned in a week. His table sat in the prime location, a corner booth with perfect views of both the restaurant and the city skyline beyond, floor-to-ceiling windows. The late afternoon sun painted the room in golden hues, making the crystal and silver sparkle like jewels. Marcus settled into the plush velvet seat, his companions arranging themselves around the large circular table. As they opened their menus, leather-bound books listing dishes with names in French and Italian, Marcus began his usual performance. He loved being the center of attention, regaling his audience with stories of his latest business conquests, his new yacht, his plans to buy another mansion. His voice carried across the quiet restaurant, drawing glances from other diners who either admired or resented his obvious display of wealth. "The merger with the European consortium will add another $3 billion to our portfolio," he announced, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Sometimes I wonder what to do with all this money." His companions laughed dutifully, though several looked uncomfortable with his boastful display. That's when she appeared. Amara Johnson approached their table with quiet confidence, a notepad in her hand and a professional smile on her face. She was 28 years old, with warm brown eyes and her hair pulled back in a neat bun according to restaurant policy. Her black uniform was crisp and clean, and she moved with the grace of someone who had been doing this job well for several years. "Good evening, gentlemen," she said in a clear, pleasant voice. "I'm Amara, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with some drinks?" Marcus looked up from his menu, his eyes taking in her appearance with obvious disdain. In his worldview, waitresses were temporary fixtures, college students or struggling actors who would move on to something else. He never bothered to learn their names or treat them as real people with real lives and dreams. But Amara was far from what Marcus assumed. She had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern University, with degrees in international relations and Middle Eastern studies. She spoke 5 languages fluently, including Arabic, which she had studied for 8 years and perfected during a year abroad in Jordan. She was working at Le Chateau to pay off student loans while applying for positions at international organizations and embassies. Her dream was to work in diplomacy, to bridge cultural gaps and help people understand each other. She had grown up in a working-class family where education was valued above all else, where her parents worked multiple jobs to give their children opportunities they never had. Amara understood struggle, but she also understood dignity. "Water will be fine," Marcus said dismissively, not bothering to look at her face. "And make sure it's the imported stuff, not tap water." Of course, sir, Amara replied professionally. And would anyone else like to start with drinks? As she went around the table taking orders, Marcus continued his conversation in Arabic with one of his business partners, a man from Dubai who was visiting Chicago to discuss a new hotel development. They spoke casually, assuming that no one around them could understand their words. The restaurant continued its elegant dance around them, servers gliding between tables, sommeliers presenting wines with ceremonial flair, the subtle choreography of fine dining, continuing as it had for decades. The other patrons seemed absorbed in their own conversations and meals, unaware that something significant was about to unfold at table 12. Amara returned with their drinks, placing them carefully on the starched white tablecloth. Her movements were precise and practiced, the result of thousands of hours perfecting her craft. She took pride in her work, regardless of how others might view it. Every job she believed deserved to be done well. As she arranged the glasses, Marcus and his companion continued their Arabic conversation, their voices growing slightly louder as they became more animated about their business discussion. Other diners glanced over occasionally, some recognizing Marcus from business magazines or society pages, others simply noting the expensive clothes and obvious wealth on display. The stage was set for what would become one of the most talked-about incidents in Le Chateau's long history. Neither Marcus nor anyone else in the restaurant could have predicted that this seemingly ordinary evening would challenge assumptions, reveal character, and change lives in ways that no one could have imagined. Marcus leaned back in his chair, swirling the imported water in his crystal glass as if it were the finest wine. His conversation with Khalid, his business partner from Dubai, had shifted to more personal topics. They spoke in rapid Arabic, their voices carrying the confidence of men who believed themselves to be in a private bubble of privilege. "You know what I hate about coming to these American restaurants?" Marcus said in Arabic, gesturing dismissively around the elegant dining room. "The service is terrible. These people have no idea how to properly serve someone of our status." Khalid nodded in agreement, though he seemed slightly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "The food is usually good here, though," he replied, also in Arabic. "Food, yes. But look at this waitress," Marcus continued, his voice growing louder and more contemptuous. He didn't bother to lower his voice or look around to see if anyone might be listening. In his arrogance, he assumed that none of the staff or other patrons could possibly understand Arabic. "She's probably some high school dropout trying to make rent money. These people have no education, no culture, no understanding of how to treat important guests." Amara stood at a nearby service station, polishing silverware and preparing bread baskets for her tables. Her ears caught every word of Marcus's cruel assessment, but her face remained perfectly composed. Years of dealing with difficult customers had taught her to maintain her professional demeanor, regardless of personal offense. She had encountered prejudice before, assumptions about her intelligence based on her job, her race, or her gender, but she had never responded with anything less than dignity. Marcus's voice grew even louder, emboldened by what he perceived as the anonymity of speaking in Arabic. "I bet she doesn't even know what half the items on this menu are. Probably thinks foie gras is some kind of French toast." He laughed at his own joke, a harsh sound that cut through the restaurant's refined atmosphere. Several of his companions shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even among Marcus's usual crowd of yes-men and social climbers, his behavior was crossing lines. But none of them dared to speak up. Marcus's wealth and power made him untouchable in their world. "Maybe we should order," suggested James Morrison, one of Marcus's lawyers, clearly trying to change the subject. "I heard the lamb is exceptional here." But Marcus wasn't finished with his performance. He was enjoying himself too much, basking in what he believed was his superior position. "You're right about the lamb," he said, still in Arabic. "But first, let me have some fun with our little waitress here. Watch this." Amara approached the table again, her notepad ready and her smile genuine despite the insults she had just endured. "Are you ready to order, gentlemen?" she asked politely. Marcus looked up at her with mock concern, speaking in heavily accented English. "Oh, my dear girl, I'm worried you might not understand our sophisticated palates. We're used to very fine dining. Perhaps you could get someone more experienced to take our order?" His companions looked down at their menus, unable to meet Amara's eyes. The cruelty was unnecessary and embarrassing, but they remained silent. In their world, Marcus's money spoke louder than their consciences. "I assure you, sir, I'm quite familiar with our menu," Amara replied calmly. "I've been working here for 3 years and I know every dish and its ingredients. I'd be happy to make recommendations based on your preferences." Marcus exchanged a smirk with Khalid. 3 whole years, he said in Arabic. "She thinks she's an expert now. I bet she can't even pronounce half these French names correctly." Turning back to Amara, he pointed to an item on the menu. "Can you tell me about the bouillabaisse? And please, speak slowly so we can understand you." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. Other diners at nearby tables were beginning to notice the interaction, some looking uncomfortable with Marcus's obvious rudeness. The restaurant's refined atmosphere seemed to grow tense around their table. Amara took a deep breath, her mind flashing to her childhood dinner table where her parents had taught her that dignity was something no one could take away from her. She thought of her professors at Northwestern who had praised her intellect and potential. She thought of the scholarship that had made her education possible, earned through hard work and determination. "The bouillabaisse is a traditional Provençal fish stew," she began, her pronunciation flawless. "Ours features locally sourced Lake Superior whitefish, paired with mussels from Prince Edward Island and prawns from the Gulf Coast. It's served with a saffron rouille and artisanal sourdough croutons." Marcus's smirk faltered slightly. Her description was more sophisticated than he had expected, delivered with confidence and knowledge that surprised him. But his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "Very good," he said patronizingly. "You've memorized the script well." Then, turning to Khalid, he switched back to Arabic. "See? They train them like parrots. She probably has no idea what half those words actually mean." Khalid looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Marcus, perhaps we should just order," he suggested quietly in Arabic. No, this is entertaining," Marcus replied, his voice growing bolder. "I want to see how far we can push this little performance. These American service workers need to understand their place." He turned back to Amara, his eyes glinting with malicious amusement. "Tell me, sweetheart, do you know what molecular gastronomy is? I doubt they teach advanced culinary concepts in your high school equivalency classes." The insult was delivered with such casual cruelty that even the nearby tables fell silent. The pianist seemed to sense the tension and let his melody fade to a whisper. Several other servers had gathered at the service station, watching the interaction with growing concern for their colleague. Amara felt the familiar fire of injustice burning in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced when professors had been surprised by her intelligence, when classmates had assumed she was there on diversity quotas rather than merit. But she also felt something else, the quiet strength that came from knowing exactly who she was and what she was capable of. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Marcus sat back in his chair, confident in his superiority, waiting for Amara to crumble under his verbal assault. His companions stared at their menus, ashamed but powerless. The other diners watched with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, unsure whether to intervene or pretend they hadn't noticed. And Amara stood there, her notepad in her hand, her dignity intact, about to deliver a response that would change everything. The silence in the restaurant seemed to stretch forever, though it lasted only seconds. Amara looked directly into Marcus's eyes, her expression calm but unwavering. When she spoke, her voice carried across the quiet dining room with crystal clarity. "In response to your question about molecular gastronomy," she began in perfect, fluent Arabic, "I can tell you that it's a culinary discipline that applies scientific principles to cooking, transforming the physical and chemical properties of ingredients. However, I suspect you already know that, Mr. Al-Rashid." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Marcus's face went completely white, then flushed deep red as the blood drained from his extremities and rushed to his head. His crystal glass slipped from his fingers, crashing to the floor in a shower of sparkling fragments and imported water. The sound seemed to echo through the stunned restaurant like a gunshot. Khalid's mouth fell open in shock, his own glass frozen halfway to his lips. The other men at the table sat in stunned silence, their carefully constructed world of assumed superiority crashing down around them like the broken crystal at their feet. But Amara wasn't finished. Her voice remained steady and professional, though now it carried the weight of her intelligence and dignity fully revealed. She continued in fluent Arabic, her accent perfect, her grammar flawless. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation about American service workers and their supposed lack of education and culture. I find it interesting that you would make such assumptions without knowing anything about the person serving you. Marcus tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air, but no sound emerged. His usually commanding presence had evaporated completely, leaving him looking small and vulnerable in his expensive suit. You mentioned that I probably don't understand what items on the menu are, Amara continued, still speaking in Arabic. The foie gras you referenced is indeed French, but perhaps you'd be interested to know that I wrote my senior thesis on the cultural significance of food in Middle Eastern diplomacy. I examined how shared meals have been used to build bridges between nations for over 1,000 years. The other diners in the restaurant had fallen completely silent now, sensing that something extraordinary was happening, even if they couldn't understand the words being spoken. The staff had gathered at a respectful distance, watching their colleague with a mixture of pride and amazement. Even the pianist had stopped playing entirely. As for my education, Amara went on, her voice carrying a subtle strength that filled the room, I graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern University, with dual degrees in international relations and Middle Eastern studies. I spent a year in Jordan perfecting my Arabic and studying diplomatic relations. I speak 5 languages fluently, and I'm currently in the process of applying for positions with several international organizations. Marcus finally found his voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. How do I speak Arabic so well? Amara asked, switching back to English so that everyone in the restaurant could understand. Through 8 years of dedicated study, immersion programs, and a genuine respect for the culture and language. The same way anyone learns anything, through hard work and dedication. She paused, letting her words sink in. The restaurant remained completely silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city beyond the windows. You asked about molecular gastronomy, she continued, her tone remaining professional, despite the magnitude of the moment. Our chef actually trained under Ferran Adrià at El Bulli. If you're interested in that style of cuisine, I'd recommend the deconstructed bouillabaisse, where traditional flavors are presented in unexpected forms, saffron pearls, liquid bread, essence of sea captured in edible bubbles. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Here was Marcus, the billionaire who prided himself on his sophistication and worldliness, being educated about fine dining by the waitress he had just insulted and dismissed. Khalid was the first to recover from the shock. I apologize, he stammered in English, looking genuinely ashamed. That was inexcusable behavior, but Marcus's shock was quickly transforming into something else. Rage. His face grew redder as the full implications of what had happened began to sink in. Not only had he been caught making cruel comments, but he had been caught by someone who understood every word, someone who was clearly far more educated and cultured than he had assumed possible. This is unacceptable, he sputtered, his voice rising. I don't care what degrees you have or what languages you speak. You're still just a waitress. You're still serving me. The cruelty of his response sent a ripple of shock through the restaurant. Even his own companions looked appalled. But Amara's response was swift and dignified. You're absolutely right, she said calmly. I am serving you, and I'm doing so with pride, professionalism, and respect, qualities that seem to be in short supply at this table tonight. She looked around at the other men, her gaze settling briefly on each face. Some looked ashamed, others uncomfortable, but none dared to meet her eyes directly. Now, she continued, would you like to hear about our wine selection, or would you prefer to continue your conversation in Arabic? I should mention that our sommelier also speaks Arabic. He studied viticulture in Lebanon for 2 years. The restaurant began to buzz with quiet conversation as other diners processed what they had witnessed. Several people pulled out their phones, though the restaurant's policy discouraged recording. Word was already beginning to spread through whispered conversations and text messages. Marcus sat frozen in his chair, his carefully constructed image crumbling around him. For the first time in decades, he found himself in a situation where his wealth and power couldn't protect him from the consequences of his actions. He was exposed, vulnerable, and completely out of his depth. The evening was far from over, and the full impact of what had just happened was only beginning to unfold. The tension at table 12 had become palpable, spreading through the restaurant like ripples in a pond. Marcus sat rigid in his chair, his face cycling through shades of red and white as he struggled to process what had just happened. His entire worldview had been shattered in the space of a few sentences, and he was desperately trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his grasp. "I want to speak to your manager," he finally managed to say, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "Immediately," Amara nodded calmly. "Of course, sir. I'll get Mr. Davidson right away." As she walked toward the manager's office, her composure never wavering, conversations at nearby tables grew more animated. Several diners had witnessed enough of the interaction to understand that something significant had occurred, and word was spreading quickly through the dining room. Phones buzzed discreetly as the story began to circulate through Chicago's social networks. Richard Davidson, the restaurant's manager, was a man in his 60s who had seen every type of customer in his 40 years in fine dining. He had dealt with celebrity meltdowns, corporate power plays, and family dramas played out over expensive meals. But as Amara quickly explained the situation, even his experienced demeanor showed surprise. "He said all of this in Arabic, assuming you wouldn't understand?" Davidson asked quietly. "Every word," Amara confirmed. "I have it all memorized if you need me to translate exactly what was said." Davidson's expression hardened. Le Chateau had built its reputation on treating every guest with respect, regardless of their background or the size of their bank account. Discrimination of any kind was not tolerated, whether from staff or patrons. Together they approached table 12, where Marcus was holding court with his companions, his voice rising as he worked himself into a righteous fury. "This is completely unacceptable," he was saying. "I spend thousands of dollars in this establishment. I bring important clients here. I will not be embarrassed by some minimum wage worker who thinks she's clever." "Mr. Al-Rashid," Davidson interrupted smoothly, his tone professional but firm. "I understand there's been some confusion. Perhaps we could discuss this privately?" Marcus looked up at the manager, seeing an opportunity to reassert his authority. "There's no confusion," he snapped. "Your waitress was eavesdropping on a private conversation, and then had the audacity to insert herself into our discussion. This is completely inappropriate behavior." "I see," Davidson replied calmly. "And this private conversation? Was it conducted at a volume that other guests could overhear?" "That's not the point," Marcus shot back, though several of his companions shifted uncomfortably. They remembered how loudly he had been speaking, how his voice had carried across the restaurant. "Actually, sir, that is precisely the point," Davidson continued. "Ms. Johnson was simply doing her job when she overheard comments that were, frankly, inappropriate for our establishment. We pride ourselves on maintaining a respectful environment for both our staff and our guests." The blood drained from Marcus's face as he realized the manager was not going to automatically take his side. In his world, money always talked loudest, and he had grown accustomed to getting his way simply by virtue of his wealth. "Are you telling me that you're going to take the word of a waitress over a customer who has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars here?" Marcus's voice was rising again, drawing even more attention from other diners. "I'm telling you that we treat all of our employees with respect, and we expect the same from our guests," Davidson replied evenly. "Ms. Johnson is one of our finest servers. She speaks multiple languages, holds advanced degrees, and has never had a single complaint in 3 years of employment here." This information hit Marcus's companions like a physical blow. Several of them had participated in the crude comments about Amara's intelligence and education, and now they were learning just how wrong they had been. The embarrassment was crushing. James Morrison, Marcus's lawyer, tried to salvage the situation. "Perhaps we all got off on the wrong foot," he suggested quietly. "Maybe we could start over, order our meals, and put this behind us." But Marcus was too far gone in his rage to accept any reasonable solution. His ego, already wounded by being caught in his prejudices, couldn't bear the thought of backing down. "No," he declared loudly, standing up from his chair. "This is unacceptable. I want her fired, immediately. Or I'll take my business elsewhere. And I'll make sure everyone knows how terribly this establishment treats its valued customers." The restaurant had gone almost completely quiet now, with diners openly staring at the scene unfolding at table 12. Several people had their phones discreetly positioned to capture the confrontation, though they were careful to comply with the restaurant's recording policies. Davidson's expression remained calm, but those who knew him well could see the steel in his eyes. "Mr. Al-Rashid, I'm afraid that's not going to happen." Ms. Johnson has done nothing wrong. In fact, she has handled this situation with remarkable professionalism, despite being subjected to inappropriate comments about her race, her intelligence, and her worth as a person. The word race hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several gasps could be heard from nearby tables, as the full implications of what had occurred became clear to everyone in the restaurant. Marcus realized too late that he had pushed too far. His demand to have Amara fired had backfired spectacularly, instead highlighting his own inappropriate behavior. But his pride wouldn't let him retreat. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "I refuse to be lectured by restaurant staff. Do you know who I am? Do you know what I'm worth?" "I know exactly who you are, sir," Davidson replied calmly. "And I know that your money doesn't give you the right to treat our staff with disrespect. We would be happy to continue serving you and your guests, but only if you can agree to treat everyone in this establishment with basic courtesy." The ultimatum was clear, and it put Marcus in an impossible position. His companions were looking at him expectantly, waiting to see how he would respond. The entire restaurant was watching. His reputation, built on power and intimidation, was crumbling in real time. Khalid, who had remained largely silent since Amara's revelation, finally spoke up. "Marcus, perhaps we should just apologize and move on. This has gone far enough." But Marcus's ego wouldn't allow him to admit fault or show weakness. Instead, he made a decision that would prove to be one of the biggest mistakes of his life. "Fine," he said, his voice carrying across the silent restaurant. "If this is how you treat valued customers, then we'll leave. But this isn't over. I have connections in this city. I have influence. This restaurant and that waitress will regret crossing me." The threat was unmistakable, and it sealed Marcus's fate in ways he couldn't have imagined. As Marcus stormed out of Le Chateau with his entourage trailing behind him like embarrassed shadows, he had no idea that his public meltdown was about to become a viral sensation. 3 different diners had managed to record parts of the confrontation, and within hours, the videos would be spreading across social media platforms faster than Marcus could contain them. But the immediate aftermath in the restaurant was electric. As soon as the doors closed behind Marcus and his group, the dining room erupted in spontaneous applause. Diners stood up at their tables, clapping for Amara and cheering her composure under pressure. Several people approached her directly to offer their congratulations and support. "That was absolutely incredible," said Margaret Chen, a prominent attorney who had been dining at a nearby table. "I've never seen anyone handle bigotry with such grace and intelligence. You should be proud of yourself." Amara accepted the praise graciously, though she felt emotionally drained from the confrontation. She had maintained her professional demeanor throughout, but the stress of being publicly insulted and then having to defend herself had taken its toll. Richard Davidson approached her with a concerned expression. "Are you all right? That was completely inappropriate behavior, and you handled it better than I could have imagined." "I'm fine," Amara assured him, though her hands were slightly shaking as the adrenaline began to fade. "I've dealt with worse, unfortunately. At least this time I could defend myself in a language they thought I didn't understand." Meanwhile, Marcus was discovering that leaving the restaurant had solved nothing. His phone had been buzzing constantly during the short ride to his downtown penthouse, and as he stepped into his marble foyer, he was greeted by his public relations manager, Sarah Williams, who looked frantic. "Marcus, we have a serious problem," she began without preamble. "There are videos of what happened at the restaurant circulating online. The story is already being picked up by local news outlets, and it's spreading fast." Marcus's blood pressure spiked as he realized the full implications. In today's connected world, public embarrassments didn't stay private. His cruel comments and humiliating retreat had been witnessed by dozens of people, many of whom had connections to Chicago's business and social communities. "Fix it," he barked at Sarah. "I don't care what it costs. Kill the story. Remove the videos. Make this go away." But Sarah, who had been managing crisis communications for 15 years, knew this was beyond her ability to contain. "Marcus, this isn't just about money. You were caught making racist comments in a public restaurant. You threatened a young woman's livelihood because she embarrassed you. This is going viral because people are genuinely outraged." The first video had been posted by Jennifer Walsh, a food blogger who happened to be dining at Le Chateau. Her footage captured Marcus's raised voice, his obvious agitation, and his threatening final words. She had posted it with the caption, "Billionaire Marcus al-Rashid having a racist meltdown because his waitress speaks Arabic. This is absolutely disgusting behavior." Within 2 hours, the video had been shared thousands of times. News outlets picked up the story. Social media influencers began commenting on it, and Marcus's name was trending on multiple platforms. The story had everything that made content go viral: wealth inequality, racial prejudice, public comeuppance, and a clear hero and villain. The second video, taken by David Rodriguez, a local news producer who had been having a quiet dinner with his wife, captured even more damaging footage. His clip showed Marcus standing up and making his threats against Amara and the restaurant, his face red with fury and his voice carrying clearly across the silent dining room. But it was the third video that proved most damaging of all. Lisa Park, a linguistics professor at the University of Chicago, had recorded Amara's calm, professional response in Arabic. She had provided subtitles translating Amara's words, showing the intelligence and dignity with which she had handled the situation. This young woman is a graduate of Northwestern University with degrees in international relations and Middle Eastern studies, Dr. Park had written in her post. She speaks 5 languages fluently and conducted herself with more class and intelligence than the billionaire who was insulting her. This is what real strength looks like. By midnight, Amara Johnson was trending nationally, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of workplace discrimination and praising her for standing up to bullying. The hashtag #billionaire disgrace was also trending, with Marcus's behavior being held up as an example of everything wrong with wealth inequality in America. The story had captured public attention because it represented something larger than just one unpleasant incident. In Amara, people saw intelligence and dignity being attacked by privilege and prejudice. In Marcus, they saw the worst aspects of wealth and power being used to demean someone who couldn't fight back. Except that she could, and she did, spectacularly. News outlets began digging deeper into the story. Reporters contacted Le Chateau for comment, reached out to Northwestern University to confirm Amara's academic achievements, and started investigating Marcus's business practices and history of controversial behavior. The Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story titled, "When Prejudice Meets Its Match Local." Waitress stands up to billionaire's bigotry. The article detailed Amara's impressive educational background and her career aspirations, painting her as a hard-working young woman pursuing her dreams despite financial challenges. Marcus found himself on the defensive in ways he had never experienced. His usual tactics of intimidation and financial pressure were useless against the court of public opinion. Worse, several of his business partners began distancing themselves from the controversy. Khalid called to express his embarrassment about being associated with Marcus's behavior and suggested they postpone their hotel development project indefinitely. Corporate sponsors began reviewing their relationships with Marcus's companies. 3 major brands that had partnerships with his businesses issued statements expressing concern about the incident and announcing they were evaluating their ongoing commitments. The irony was not lost on social media. Commentators that Marcus, who had built his fortune partly through Middle Eastern business connections, had been exposed making bigoted comments about Arabic-speaking people. His hypocrisy added another layer to the public's outrage. Meanwhile, at Le Chateau, Amara was experiencing an unprecedented outpouring of support. The restaurant's phone rang constantly with people wanting to make reservations, specifically to be served by her. Flowers and cards arrived hourly from strangers who had seen the video and wanted to show their appreciation for her dignified response. Several major news networks reached out requesting interviews, but Amara declined most of them, preferring to let her actions speak for themselves. She did agree to one interview with a local Chicago station, where she spoke eloquently about the importance of treating all people with dignity, regardless of their job or background. The story had taken on a life of its own, and Marcus was about to discover that in the age of social media, there was no amount of money that could buy back a destroyed reputation. 6 months after the incident at Le Chateau, the ripple effects continued to reshape both Marcus and Amara's lives in ways neither could have predicted. The viral video had become a cultural touchstone, studied in business schools as an example of how quickly reputations could be destroyed in the digital age. and referenced in diversity training programs across corporate America. Marcus al-Rashid's empire, built over decades of ruthless business practices and strategic networking, had crumbled with shocking speed. The initial social media backlash had been just the beginning. Within weeks of the restaurant incident, a cascade of consequences had begun that would fundamentally alter his life and business empire. The first major blow came when the Dubai Hotel Consortium, led by his former partner Khalid, officially terminated their $3 billion development deal. The contract included a morality clause that allowed either party to withdraw if the other's actions brought significant reputational harm to the partnership. The viral video certainly qualified. Corporate sponsors fled like rats from a sinking ship. Nike terminated an endorsement deal for his private basketball team. American Express canceled his Black Card partnerships. Even luxury brands that had courted his business for years began quietly distancing themselves from the controversy. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. Marcus's own board of directors, led by his longtime friend and business partner Robert Chen, called an emergency meeting. The room was tense as Robert delivered news that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "Marcus, we've been friends for 20 years, Robert began, his voice heavy with regret. "But the board has voted. We're asking you to step down as CEO effective immediately." Marcus sat in stunned silence in the boardroom of the company he had built from nothing. The mahogany table, the leather chairs, the view of Chicago's skyline, everything that had once represented his success now felt like a mockery. The stock price has dropped 30% since the video went viral, continued Rebecca Walsh, the company's CFO. "We're losing contracts daily. Major clients are refusing to renew agreements. The al-Rashid name has become toxic in the business community." The irony was crushing. Marcus, who had spent his career dismissing people he considered beneath him, was being brought down by the very people he had considered insignificant. His cruelty toward Amara had exposed a character flaw that his business associates could no longer ignore or excuse. Meanwhile, Amara's life had transformed in the most remarkable ways. The international attention had opened doors she never could have imagined. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Director of Cultural Affairs at the United Nations, had seen the video and been impressed not just by Amara's language skills, but by her grace under pressure. "We need people like you in international diplomacy," Dr. Mitchell had told Amara during a phone call that came just 2 weeks after the incident. "Someone who can build bridges between cultures, who understands that dignity transcends language barriers." The UN offered Amara a position as a cultural liaison specialist, working specifically on Middle Eastern relations. The salary was triple what she made at Le Chateau, and more importantly, it was exactly the career she had dreamed of since college. But Amara's success extended far beyond her new job. Northwestern University had invited her to speak at their commencement ceremony, where she delivered a powerful speech about maintaining dignity in the face of discrimination. The speech, titled "When Grace Meets Prejudice," was viewed millions of times online and established her as an inspiring voice for young professionals facing workplace discrimination. Publishing houses reached out about book deals. Speaking bureaus offered lucrative contracts for corporate diversity training sessions. Television producers wanted to develop her story into a movie. Amara found herself overwhelmed by opportunities, but she approached each one with the same thoughtful consideration she had shown that night at the restaurant. She chose carefully, accepting only the opportunities that aligned with her values and career goals. She wrote a book called Dignity and Service: Lessons in Grace Under Pressure, which became a bestseller and was translated into 12 languages. The proceeds funded a scholarship program for working students pursuing international relations degrees. Marcus, meanwhile, found himself experiencing something completely foreign: consequences for his actions. His penthouse was seized by creditors. His art collection was sold at auction. His yacht was repossessed. The man who had once boasted about not knowing what to do with his money was learning what it felt like to watch his fortune disappear. But the financial losses, devastating as they were, paled in comparison to the social exile. Chicago's elite, who had once competed for invitations to his parties, now crossed the street to avoid him. Restaurants that had once reserved their best tables for him now politely declined his reservations. The social circle that had revolved around his wealth had vanished overnight. The most painful moment came when Marcus ran into Khalid at Chicago's airport 6 months after the incident. His former business partner, once a close friend, looked genuinely uncomfortable when he spotted Marcus waiting for a flight. "Marcus," Khalid said quietly, approaching with obvious reluctance. "How are you?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Marcus looked tired, older, his expensive suit now slightly ill-fitting as financial stress had caused him to lose weight. The confidence and arrogance that had once defined him had been replaced by something that looked almost like humility. "I've been better," Marcus admitted, his voice lacking its former commanding tone. "I've had time to think about things. About that night at the restaurant. About a lot of things, actually." Khalid nodded uncomfortably. "It was a difficult situation for everyone." "No," Marcus said firmly, surprising both himself and Khalid with his directness. "It was a situation I created through my own arrogance and prejudice. That young woman didn't deserve what I said about her, what I said about any of them." It was perhaps the first genuine moment of self-reflection Marcus had experienced in decades. The fall from grace had stripped away the layers of entitlement and ego that had insulated him from seeing his own flaws. As their flights were called in different directions, Khalid paused. "Marcus, for what it's worth, I hope you find a way forward. We all make mistakes. It's what we do afterward that defines us." Those words would stay with Marcus during the long flight to Phoenix, where he was relocating to start over with what remained of his assets. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors was now flying economy class, carrying just 2 suitcases and a profound understanding of how quickly a life could change. In the months that followed, both Marcus and Amara would continue their journeys of transformation. Marcus began volunteering at a local community center, teaching business skills to immigrant entrepreneurs. It was humbling work that slowly began to reconnect him with his own humanity. Amara continued her rise in international diplomacy, eventually becoming one of the youngest cultural ambassadors in UN history. The incident at Le Chateau had lasted less than 10 minutes, but its consequences would ripple through their lives for years to come. It served as a powerful reminder that in an interconnected world, character matters more than wealth. Dignity transcends social status, and sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. The story became more than just a viral video. It became a modern parable about respect, prejudice, and the transformative power of grace under pressure. And while Marcus learned that money couldn't buy back a destroyed reputation, Amara proved that true strength comes not from the power to hurt others, but from the courage to maintain dignity when others try to diminish it.